person in question is at liberty to leave the residential placement. And that of itself seems fairly simple, although we'll see there are complexities with that as a concept. By contrast, perhaps, Mumby, as he then was, in Cheshire, has gone on to develop the issue of looking at the individual who has disabilities as a person who has to be compared with another individual suffering the same disabilities. Can it be said that such a disabled comparator would in essence have been able to enjoy a level of liberty that has been taken away from them or otherwise? And it's so the contrast, the type of life that P can live, and a further concentration on the purpose for which the deprivation of liberty has been authorised. We'll return to look later in the talk and in the notes as to how that has been arrived at and what the Supreme Court may elect to do in terms of perhaps ensuring that the wrong turn we go back to a path that is convergent with that is set out in Europe. But I want to take you back now to the structure of the scheme, because it is important for us to have in our minds the structure of the scheme when we continue to think about the two aspects that we were balancing at the beginning of our discussion, individual autonomy and concepts of safeguarding. In essence, the purpose behind the new legislation brought in after Bournemouth was to give a voice to somebody who, in essence, voice may have been muffled by their removal to residential care, and to ensure that if you embark upon such a scheme, that is in essence a scheme of last resort, and that en route to arriving at whether or not there has been a regime that you have to have by way of a deprivation of liberty, you have gone on to consider at each juncture whether there is a less restrictive regime that P can actually live safely in respect of. So that's what I'm just going to look at for a moment. So we're looking at Schedule A1 of the Matrimonial Causes Act. Sorry, of the Mental Capacity Act. I'm just looking at the MCA for the moment. And looking at that, there are a number of qualifying requirements that effectively have to be looked at. The first is that P has to be over the age of 18. They have to be then over the age of 18, they have to be suffering from the mental disorder that has been identified, and that if P also then lacks the capacity to decide if he should be so accommodated. And we'll look a little bit further on about a number of cases where the central issue has been whether or not P has in fact retained that capacity. Then we move to the familiar consideration of whether or not the detention effectively is indeed in P's best interests. So that involves there being a best interest assessment, familiar to the audience, I know, but effectively it's an important element because, of course, you're looking to balance. This has the complete tension between those two principles that we've been looking at, that in order to prevent harm for P, it's necessary for him to be detained, his detention is a proportionate response, and then the balance and seriousness of that harm. So what I wanted then to pick up, looking at my notes at paragraph 5.2, it's therefore central to the discussion that we're having, is that the primary concern remains P's welfare. Is the proposed placement in circumstances that might amount to a deprivation of liberty strictly necessary? Now, of course, it's going to be enormously important in those circumstances who it is who undertakes the best interest assessment. And they are identified as being a best interest assessor. This individual may be a social worker, nurse, occupational therapist. And there is identified under the deprivation of liberty safeguards, which is a lengthy code of practice, which I have just identified the central paragraphs for this discussion. The first question that has to be asked comes back to this central issue of definition, which we've yet entirely to grapple with. Is a deprivation of liberty occurring or likely to occur? And if so, would it then be in the best interests of P to be deprived of their liberty? So you can see that the trigger for the authorisation process to begin running is that the assessor has to take a view that the deprivation of liberty may occur if the regime is endorsed by them. Now, the problem we've indicated here is that it's not going to be a lawyer making that initial assessment. So it means that the clinical teams and care workers need to be able to understand what that definition comprises. And we will see that until the Supreme Court give judgment, and we have to abide by the Cheshire case, this is indeed a tall order. So we have to ensure, if we possibly can, that what we're then looking at is the regime that the P may